everyone. Today we have speaking a Ph.D. candidate at the Division of Global Affairs, Scott Fischer, who many, if not all of you, already know. His graduate coursework focused on international security and area studies, and his forthcoming dissertation tests the saliency of cyber and information tools in the foreign policy toolkit. His professional experience includes years as a professor of Korean English translation in Seoul, work as a crisis management analyst for the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, and a recent deployment to Afghanistan as an Army officer in charge of counterterrorism focused information operations team. His publications include Work Hard for the Kims, An Introduction to North Korea Through the Country's Propaganda Posters, Speaking of Everyday Life, a best-selling ESL textbook series in Korea, and Axis of Evil, World Tour, and Americans' Travels in North Korea, Iraq, and Iran. He blogs at travelswithscott.com, and you all should look it up because it's actually an interesting blog. We were browsing it yesterday. Yeah. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Scott Fischer.
I think I know most of you. And yeah, the North Korea book did one of these colloquium things last semester about that. So always fun. For the presentation today, you can see from the board there, Military, Intel Agency and Military 101. What we're going to talk about not so much is the big picture, not so much should the Intel agencies be doing X, Y, and Z, or what's the role of the military in society. The goal here is to introduce as much as possible about the terms, the people involved, the processes involved, who's involved. So when you do have those greater discussions, you have a little bit better mastery, a little bit better nuance of all the terms and the people who are involved in these discussions. Is anybody here in the military? In this country or any other country? No. Anybody here work for? I was, okay. Here? Yeah. Here, okay. Which branch?
Army.
Army, okay, yeah. So I'm also in the Army, so this will have somewhat of an Army focus. If anybody here has any Navy experience or Air Force, please feel free to speak up. Please also add anything you see as we go through. Okay. Anybody federal government experience? Yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. The goal here is whether or not you are interested in the Army or international security, chances are whatever you are interested in global affairs is going to someday encounter this. You're going to have a relationship with this. You're going to come across people who work at Intel agencies or who work in Intel at places like the Department of Agriculture, the National Institutes of Health. Intel's everywhere, right? So we're going to get into that. So even if you think, this has nothing to do with me, you may be surprised you're overseas sometime doing development work and all of a sudden some people show up in a weird vehicle with beards or without beards and start asking you some questions. So this is how you can kind of have a better understanding of some of those folks. As we go through, ask questions at any time. Don't in any way hesitate. If I'm in the middle of a sentence, maybe give me a signal that you got something. I'll finish and you can go right away. No formality, please just fire away anytime you have a question. And then with any further ado, we'll get started. We're going to look at the military first, kind of some background, some general info. And then we'll move on to Intel agencies, the classification process, classification levels, those type of things. And then we'll end kind of on a very job-specific, job-related note. Some of you in the future may want to get a job in international security, so hopefully that will address those questions. So we'll move through. When we get to the jobs portion, you'll know we're about done. But again, ask questions at any time. All right, so let's jump in here, go ahead and have a look. All right, and what this does is highlight something that kind of brought up at the beginning of the conversation. Right? The amount of military experience in the populace at large here in the United States is decreasing. Right? During World War II, 10, 12, 15% of the population had direct experience working with the military. They may not have been in the military. They may have, but they may have worked for the Department of the Army, the Department of the Navy, the Department of War, as it was called back then. So they had that personal direct experience with somebody in uniform. The Vietnam War that had dropped 7%, despite that there was a national draft, there was still only roughly 7%, roughly half of the World War II population had direct experience with the military. In the current wars, we've been at war for almost 15 years now, Iraq and Afghanistan. Despite that, it's less than 2% of the American populace has direct experience with the military. When you look at those who have gone and fought in Iraq or Afghanistan, anybody know the percentage on that? It's 0.45, the lowest percentage in US history. So when we get to that, when we have a conversation with a group of people who are interested in global affairs, what does that mean? How isolated has the army become, or has the military become from society? Is that healthy? Prior to World War II, that was more normal. The level that we're at now is low, but not that low by historical standards. It's much lower by post-World War II standards. So are we reverting to our norm, long-term historically, or are we getting to something new in the post-World War II, Cold War, post-Cold War era that maybe is good, maybe bad, has some good and bad effects, but at least is something that we should think about. And this is a true story. We have someone here, obviously, in a military uniform. We have a gentleman here as a doorman. I graduated from some military training. We invited a former general to come and speak at our training. And he opened up the presentation by telling this exact story. He was in Manhattan for a conference, had his full dress uniform on, as this gentleman here does, walked out of the hotel and was waiting for the driver with his car to take him to the conference. As he was waiting, someone jumped out of a cab, said, "Hey, bags are in the back, get it," and went in to the general. The person confused the general for the doorman. Right? This is a general who is the former head of logistics for the entire army. Tens of thousands of people worked for him, billions of dollars was directly tied to him and to what he did. And yet the guy thought he was a doorman. It just highlights the disconnect, even though we've been at war for a decade and a half, between society at large and the military. Good, bad, who knows, but it's a point of discussion. All right, and that's what we're going to try and do here is address some of that disconnect, provide some of those terms, provide some of that background. So let's take a look at this guy. When looking at him, which branch of service is he in? Don't answer. He's in the Army. Okay, how do we know he's in the Army? There's several things to tell us.
Color service.
Okay, yeah, you can tell from his uniform. I put the hint here, soldier. So, several things to tell us. Has this person been deployed in a combat zone, someplace like Afghanistan or Iraq?
Yes.
Yes, and how do you know?
Medals.
Yeah, the medal specifically here.
No.
All of this stuff, nothing to do with it. Well, maybe something that he did there, but what signifies it is this particular medal here. While he was in that combat zone, some people go to a combat zone, sit in an office, never see anything they wouldn't see right here in Newark. While he was in that combat zone, did he engage in combat himself?
Yes.
Yes, and how do you know that?
Medal and it's also infantry.
Okay, yeah, you know that from here, from his CIB, his combat infantryman's badge that you can only get if you're in the infantry and in combat. All right, and then the last, what branch of service is he in? Is he Intel, MP, infantry? What would he be?
Now.
Yeah, in this uniform. Yeah. He's in the infantry, all right? You know that partly through the color here, but the real key is this. This braid, this blue braid, is only worn by people in the infantry. All right? So again, we've been at war for 15 years, all right? And it's the amount of knowledge of what this represents is relatively low. You can see how the mistake could be made with the doorman, all right, and the person and the general. So we're going to move on and talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so here are all the branches of service. All right, when you look up, here are the different folks. You got the Air Force, you got the Army. This is the old uniform. We're phasing this one out. Part of an effort to waste as much of your taxpayer money as possible. Marine here, Navy here, and then on the left, Coast Guard. Coast Guard's interesting. They're normally, are they part of DoD? Department of Defense? Yeah, exactly. They're Homeland Security. They're normally considered part of DHS, though on federal orders they can be called in and become part of the DoD for specific missions or other tasks. But normally they're part of DHS, Homeland Security, and these four here are part of the DoD. The uniforms change. The Navy is changing theirs. They wanted the ACU style uniform to match the rest of the military. Then people fell overboard. Is that the color uniform you want to be wearing if you fall off a ship and you want people to find you? No. They realized, hey, maybe this isn't the best idea, so they're switching that out and getting a new uniform with a different color scheme.
Can I ask a question?
So, of course, anytime, please.
The old BDUs, do we sell the old BDUs to other armies?
We usually give them. And they're mostly out at this point. We don't really have any in store. Maybe some private companies make them, and we could maybe contract with them to send them to someone, but you don't see those very much anymore. Some old National Guard units may have those, but we don't normally see them. Occasionally we may give them out, but it's not something we would have in store. We would approach a company to make them and then ship them to whatever country we're trying to give them to. And that would be partly what that country wanted. Right? These stink. These are horrible. Everybody hates these. Right? They don't work. There's a famous picture of some guy laying on a couch. You can barely see him on the couch. It's the only time these have ever been known to work. You walk in the desert, the jungle, whatever, you stick out like a sore thumb. So nobody wants them, so we don't have to give them to anybody. So the new ones are pretty good, and the old ones are also pretty good. So, good. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Yeah, anytime, feel free to ask a question. When these people work together, 2 of them, or 3, 4, all 5 work together, that's called joint. Anytime you hear people talking about joint in the military, not so much this aspect, though I guess maybe that'll change someday, but joint means these two of the organizations are working together, right? Or 3 or more. The U.S. Army, the U.S. military, is known for working jointly more than most other militaries in the world, partly due to our history, partly due to funding reasons, Congress trying to get people to work together, so not every service has its own separate tank, its own separate helicopter, its own separate everything. People work together, it saves money by being able to share some of those research and development budgets and some of the then production budgets across. You'll notice how well this has worked with getting everybody in the same uniform. Any other questions? Okay, move on. Oops, sorry, wrong way. Okay, because we work together doesn't mean we don't joke. Doesn't mean there aren't stereotypes that are commonly reinforced. Doesn't mean we don't give each other a hard time. We work jointly all the time. I've never worked anything in the Army outside of maybe training that we weren't doing something with another service. Because of that, you have jokes like this. Right. So what branch of service is this gentleman in? Marine. He's a Marine, yeah. You can tell from here, but also from the uniform. Officer, right? And you have this gentleman here. Right. This dining facility, this DFAC, is likely overseas. Several clues to that, but likely this is taken somewhere in Iraq or Afghanistan. Anybody know what this belt is? PT belt. It's a belt you wear when you go exercise. The uniform that gentleman is wearing is an exercise uniform. Part of the reason I think this picture was taken is the incongruity of the man's physique with his dress and appearance, both in the Army and then there. All right, so people still joke back and forth. The Army person, what's their response when they see something like this?
That's a bad example of the Army.
Yeah, a bad example of the Army, but also I wonder who the Marine found who was literate enough to make the PowerPoint slide. So it goes back and forth. And it doesn't mean we don't dislike each other. It just means we work together a lot, and everybody brings those stereotypes to the table. My last deployment to Afghanistan, people I work with the least were the Army. People I work with the most were the Air Force and the Navy. So it just depends on your nature of your assignment. But that is one specialty of the US. I work with the Brits a lot. When you work with the Brits, you're generally working with one part of the Brits, the Navy or the Army. Rarely do you come across a joint team when you're working with another group of militaries. South Korean military is a little atypical. They're a little more joint, but most militaries are pretty separate, right? Or you can be like China, where the Navy is just part of the Army. So they're all working together anyway. The term China has the People's Liberation Army Navy. The Navy is just a subdivision of the Army, which some people would argue is normal, but that's the way the Chinese do it there. Any questions here? Okay. All right, so let's get into a little bit more details here on the military folks. Again, this is kind of Army focused, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Army. If you have any questions related to Navy, Air Force, I'll be happy to try and answer. Hopefully I'll be able to. Basic rank structure. People have heard the term officer, enlisted, you've heard the term private, sergeant, something like that. What does that mean? All right. Does a lieutenant salute a sergeant? Basic stuff like that. No, right? That's not how it works. The military is very hierarchical. This is enforced. Right? If we were sitting here having this type of discussion or having some type of class, and this was a military organization, and the commander walked in, what would happen? Yeah, everybody would jump on their feet. The military still does it. Just the first time that day. You don't do it every time. You never get anything done. You also don't do that in a war zone. That's only something you do outside of a war zone. So all these types of rules, all these types of ways of living. So if you're in some future job and you're interacting with the military, it would help you to know this. So you don't, so when you walk into a room, you know, okay, this person's likely the person in charge, or this person's likely is not, or this person is a specialist in what I'm talking about. May not be in charge, but likely knows the most about what I'm talking about, or what I need from these people. So it's good to know that as you walk in, and that's kind of the point of the presentation. All right, so how about this guy here? What rank? He's enlisted, he's a sergeant, technically a sergeant first class. So you can see that from here. The rank used to be on the collars, but now the rank is here in the center, gives the sniper something to aim at. And then it's also on your hat. If you're wearing a helmet, it's usually not. Usually when you're deployed, if you're outside the wire, out on patrol, your rank is usually covered anyway because nobody salutes you when you're out and people may be attacking you. So you've got enlisted. Enlisted non-commissioned officers. Lowest is private, E1. Enlisted are called, the abbreviation is E. E1 up through E9. E9 is a very high rank. You don't salute him, but that person, male or female, has a very high rank. They've spent probably 25 years in the Army to get to the level where they're at. They're very well respected. They're not an officer. They're a non-commissioned officer. It's different. So as you get into, as you peel the onion on this, they're well respected. They know their job. They can interface quite well with large organizations to get things accomplished, but they're not an officer. It's different. Somebody who walks out of West Point, pins on their brand new officer badge, gets saluted by the person with the 25 years of service. It's the rank structure. That lieutenant, that brand new West Point graduate or ROTC graduate, better not abuse that. So that's one of the things you learn in officer school. And also, at E9, that person who's been in for 25 years probably works directly for a general. That brand new officer tries to pull anything, that general will correct very clearly that brand new lieutenant. But you have that. It's an ongoing issue within the military. You have people who are brand new, been in the Army 2 days, who get saluted by and called sir or ma'am by somebody who's been in for 25 years. It's an issue. When you walk into a room, you should know those dynamics. This person is younger, but he or she may actually technically be in charge. Though if something happens, everybody's going to turn to the person who's actually in charge, who has the most experience. All right? So you have that. These people are called enlisted, whereas officers are normally called commissioned for a reason. People always ask me, always talk about how long are you in for? Well, that's only for enlisted. Enlisted people, the origin of the term, sign a contract. They join for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever they work out with their recruiter when they join. After that initial period is up, say 4 years, after that 4 years is up, they can leave, or they can stay. If they stay, they sign another contract for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever they work out. Then at the end of each of those points, they can come or they can go. Officers are different. You have your initial period of enlistment, normally 4 years for officers. After that 4 years, you can come and go at any time. If I want to leave the Army tomorrow, I fill out a form, submit the form, wait the 700 months it takes for the form to process, and then I can leave. All right? That's the difference between commissioned and enlisted. So if you ask an officer, how much longer do you have? It's an odd question. Until I hit 20 years and get retirement, and we can leave anytime we want.
Question.
Sure.
If you leave, you said you can return at any time. Does that mean you can also be called back at any time?
It depends. There's a couple of ways of leaving. One way you leave is cut ties completely. Another way you leave is to go on what's called the inactive reserve list. If you're an inactive reservist, you don't drill, you don't do anything, you have no connection to the military, but you're on a list somewhere. And if you have a specific skill set that is suddenly needed for some overseas contingency, then yeah, you may get that phone call. Or while you're on the IRR, the inactive reserve list, there may be something big happens and they call a bunch of people back. If you totally leave though, barring outside of World War III, there's little likelihood you're going to get called back. Depending on your age, you may go back. If you're too old, they're not going to take you. But if you come in fresh out of college, You spend 10 years, decide, oh, I want to go do some civilian stuff, or I want to focus on my family for a while. You do that for a few years and you kind of miss it and want to go back, then you have the possibility to do that. But once you get above into your 40s, that becomes more difficult. Anybody else? Okay, and here in the middle you have what's called warrant officers. These are relatively new. They're not super common. The origin was a helicopter pilot. Helicopters are very expensive. Right? They can do a lot of damage. There's a lot of responsibility involved in flying a helicopter and operating the weapon systems of a helicopter. An officer doesn't want to do it because an officer manages things. Officers don't do anything other than PowerPoint. Officers manage stuff. Enlisted people actually do things. But with the helicopter, they kind of were worried about it. So what they did is they kind of created this new structure in the middle. They're kind of enlisted. They come from the enlisted ranks once they've hit a certain level of mastery. They have to take additional training, sign an additional contract, go to a bunch of additional schooling. But they're the military's experts. They don't boss anybody around, but they know their subject. Now it's expanded. A lot of the cyber people are warrants. A lot of your pilots are warrants for helicopters. A lot of your linguists, top linguists are warrants. A lot of your top intel specialists are warrant officers. So they're the military specialists. They're not going to boss anybody around, and they hate to be bossed around, but they know a lot. All right? So again, you walk into a room, you see somebody with a warrant officer rank, squares, a couple of squares, 3 squares on their rank. They know more than anybody else in the room, including the general, what's going on. All right? So good to know. Can be difficult to work with. Can be kind of prima donnas, but good to
The warrant officers, what branch are they usually at? Are they generals, colonels, or?
Oh no, they're called a warrant officer. There's warrant, for them it's easy. Warrant officer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's all they're called. So W1, W2, W3, on up. W1 is what you get when you first come out. You quickly make W2, and then you slowly work your way up based on seniority and mastery of whatever skill set it is that you do. But they're called, when you address them in conversation, they're always called chief. And so the general calls them chief, the private calls them chief. Everybody calls them chief, out of respect for the knowledge they bring to the table. Is somebody else? Not super common outside the US. Most militaries may have it to some extent, but not super common outside the US. Then you have your 3 components. People say, oh, I'm active, I'm reserve, I'm guard. And what does that mean? People ask me this all the time. You're in the Army, but you're here. What are you doing? So, because I'm technically in the reserve. What's the difference between the reserve and the guard? It's the difference with active duty. So the New Jersey National Guard. Who's in charge of the New Jersey National Guard? Yeah, Chris Christie is in charge of the New Jersey National Guard. The governor of the state is normally in charge of the, it's called the National Guard. It shouldn't be. It's the Guard. It works at the state level. They can be called up, the term is called up, they can be called up, federalized is the official term. They can be federalized and sent to Iraq, Afghanistan, Haiti, wherever they may be going. But day to day, they work for the governor of that state.
Question.
You know what it was that was used? It's interesting. People think military, they always think people with guns. And it was water. Right? The military has the capability to provide clean, sanitary drinking water quickly and in thousands and thousands of gallons. So a reserve unit from Florida was federalized, was brought up, was activated, brought up to New Jersey and provided drinking water down on the shore. So that was the first case of the law changes of federal troops being used on U.S. soil. But it's very strict. It's normally the Guard that's brought out in those types of cases. And that's not the president's decision. It's not our federal official decision. That's a state official, the governor's final decision on that. So Guard people report to the state. Active duty and reserves report to the president. When I get commissioned as an officer, raise that right hand, it's the president technically who commissions me. The Guard can be a little bit different when it comes to that type of stuff. And there's 50 states, there's 50 different ways the Guard does business. Not just the Army Guard, there's the Air Guard, Navy, etc. And yes, Tennessee has a Naval Reserve, Naval Guard. Why Tennessee has it? Question. But even states with no connection to the open ocean also have Guard units or reserve units that relate to water, Navy, etc. So active duty, these are the full-timers. These are the guys, the men and women who do this every day. They join, fresh out of high school, fresh out of college, join when you're 35, join when you're 40, whatever. But they do this every day. You have the Guard, which we just talked about, state level, can be called up and sent to Iraq, Afghanistan, some overseas contingency, or if there's some type of emergency within the state, can be called up, ordered to by the governor. And this can be the Guard in Maryland was called up in Baltimore in response to issues going on there. The Guard can be called up in what's called up in Ferguson. These are the most recent ones. You go to the Port Authority in Lower Manhattan. Occasionally you'll see people walking around with guns in an army uniform or a military uniform. Those are New York Guard members who are called up specifically for that Port Authority mission post 9/11 to provide ongoing additional security there. But again, it's not always people with guns when you call up the Guard. It can be people simply, we need 20,000 sandbags filled. Who's going to fill 20,000 sandbags? Hey, we've got a bunch of privates and corporals, and they're going to love to go do that. So that's where you can also get kind of a built-in workforce. And you may call up some people in the Guard who are specialists in intel. And you say to those intel specialists, all right, we have this issue going on in Ferguson right now. Here's a weapon. You may not have seen a weapon in 2 years, 3 years. Now go stand guard in this highly contentious situation, and you're going to be in the middle of it. Is that a prescription for success? No, not really. So you've got to be careful when you see this. Some of these people may not have been trained for the mission, or their training may have been, hey, this is going to happen. All right, we're going to do some training today, and tomorrow we're getting in the truck. So sometimes these people are not set up for success, and so that concerns people when they look at that.
Two questions.
Sure.
One, is there a psychological evaluation done on Guard members? And then is there an evaluation after their service?
You get evaluated constantly. It's a yearly requirement. I actually just had to go through it last week. It's a yearly requirement that you have to speak to a provider about your, not just mental, but about your mental and physical health, and you have to get checked up on that. So it's before you come in, after you leave, and then annually while you're in. Also, if you're going to go deploy to Afghanistan, for example, you get checked out additionally before you go there. You get checked out once you get back. Initially, right when you get back, you get checked out like 30 days after you get back, and then 60 or 90, within 90 days, again, after you get back. So there's multiple checks as you go through this process. Whether it's worth anything, everybody knows the answer to give if they don't want anybody to continue bother them, basically. So, but it's also a good way of unearthing some of these issues because you keep asking and they keep that baseline, right? So they can notice, even if you're not consciously aware you're changing your decisions, they'll notice in the data that, hey, this person's actually changing. And some of these questionnaires can be 150 questions long. And so you're going through, they're like, oh my God, will this ever end? But as you're answering them, compared to last year, the year before, compared to pre-deployment, post-deployment, you may see some changes in there, and that they may catch it, even if you don't. So, other question? That was okay. So then, yeah, so active duty, your full-timers, your Guard at the state level, but then can be called, federalized, and sent to an overseas contingency. Then you have the reserve. The reserve is relatively new. This is more of a Cold War thing, where the Army, the military decided, hey, we need to have people who aren't tied to the state, who can be more readily brought into a federal emergency and sent somewhere or be capable of doing something. Usually the skill sets are different. A lot of infantry in the Guard, a lot of MPs in the Guard. MPs are naturals for places like Ferguson. Not always are they the ones that get called. Reserve has different components. I'm in an information operations unit. You have psychological operations. You have those water specialists. You have all kinds of odd skill sets in the reserve that you don't have at the Guard. The Guard has to function on a state level. It costs the state money. Right? So the state doesn't want to invest in esoteric capabilities that it may not need. Right? That's where the Federal Reserve comes in, is that the federal government will invest in cyber capabilities or other capabilities that some state may not need, but federally somewhere may be in need, and you can be called up and sent. To send the Guard to another state can be a pain. It can be a difficult paperwork nightmare. Right? To send reservists is not so bad. Same thing. If you decide to join, you need to keep that in mind. If you join the Guard, you're tied to a state. So you join, then you decide, or your job says you get a new job, and you move to California. Well, you're still in the New York or New Jersey Guard. And it is an ungodly paperwork nightmare to transfer from the Guard here to the Guard there. Reserves are different. Reserves are set up precisely to deal with that. You just say, okay, I've moved, I'm going to go start drilling with a reserve unit out in California. Okay, great. Done. Takes a month, 2 months. Rarely does anything move that quickly in the military or federal government. So that's one of the things you need to keep in mind. If you have very close ties to a particular state, guard. If you're going to be moving around, reserve makes more sense. Or if you want a specific kind of more specialized or esoteric capability, again, reserve is the way to go on that. That's what they bring to the table. And the last point I want to make on this slide is because someone's in the uniform does not mean they're in the military. Port Authority is a good example. Sometimes those guys will wear their ACUs, they'll wear this uniform, but over here it won't say U.S. Army. Sometimes it'll say civilian, sometimes it'll say contractor, sometimes it can say police, whatever. All right? So just because a person's in a uniform does not mean they're in the military. Or just because a person's in an Army uniform doesn't mean they're in the Army. Right? The Navy sometimes wears our uniform when they're working with us. Why do people wear uniforms in these type of tactical or overseas war environment? If you're a civilian or if you're a contractor. So put yourself in the mind of a sniper. You're looking down, you're going to shoot somebody, or you're going to blow up an ID and kill some people. Everybody looks exactly the same except, oh, today you've got a brand new LL Bean red flannel shirt, and you decide you're a civilian, you decide, that's what I'm going to wear today. And so that person's looking and, whoa, who's the person in red? Well, they're different, they've got to be special. Who's the target? That person. All right? So that's why contractors, civilians, etc., will wear a uniform when they're working with the military overseas. Also why the police will wear similar uniforms, maybe not this exact same one, but will wear similar uniforms to each other when they go to a tactical shooter situation like in the community college in Oregon recently. Right? So everybody looks the same, you stick out less to someone who's trying to kill you, which is a good thing. When I was a civilian working overseas for the Department of Defense, I wore this uniform, but I also had civilian over here. Again, you don't want to stick out in this situation. So that's why. So the Port Authority is a good example. Right? You'll see people over there, it'll say U.S. Army. Those are the National Guard folks from New York. Other times it may say police or something different. So go ahead and give a look-see. Right? Which side is it on? Always on?
Left.
Yeah, it's left. Above your heart. So, yeah. Which everybody teaches you that in basic training, and you're like, all right, shut up. The Army is, people joke about the Army for this. We have a lot of eye candy, chest candy that we'll put over here, even on our day-to-day uniform. Most branches of service only put this on their dress uniform. What this does is this discusses this person's history and special skill sets. Right? So here, this person has been in a battle overseas, in an infantry battle, and received this to signify that. This person is an expert master parachutist. This person knows about being a paratrooper. This person is also a pathfinder. Before everybody goes in, a few people go in to secure the airfield. This person is trained to do that. This one I can't quite make out, but it's probably an air assault badge, which means this person can rappel out of a helicopter. So you see that on some people. It's kind of their calling card. Right? Some people wear the nice suit. Brooks Brothers or some fancy suit to show what they have. In the Army, you'll have all this stuff here. You have the tab over here. It's hard to see with the projector, but it says Ranger. Right? This signifies this person as past Ranger school. They could be a special operator, something like that.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go straight to the Ranger School? Do you have to have a certain amount of time?
You can go straight. You can go walk into a recruiter, sign a contract, and go straight to Ranger School, meaning you go to basic training, you go to infantry school, and then you either go to Ranger School first, and then airborne, or more normally you go to airborne school, and then once you pass that, then you go to Ranger School. Right? But
Just drop out of the helicopter?
airborne is planes. Airborne is parachutes. Air assault is going down a rope, rappelling off the side or whatever. Airborne school is 3 weeks of falling down. It's not hard. You don't have to be smart to pass it. You just have to be able to take.
Going back to joint operation,
Mhm.
how do you share information between different units? Do you have a centralized kind of body?
Yeah, we'll have centralized systems. Everybody will be on the same computer system, for example. Same email system, et cetera, pinging back and forth. And so it doesn't matter whether they're Army or Navy or Air Force. That organization, the joint organization, will have control over those systems, and everybody will join that system and then be able to share things back and forth. The connectivity back to their original branch should be good. Not always is, but should be good. But you'll have some shared connectivity there, shared channels on the radio, shared procedures for how you operate, weapons to carry.
How about the command? How does it work?
The command is different people are put in charge. Like when the last joint team that I was on, there was an Army colonel who was in charge of that. But most of the people there, or not most, but a good number of the people there were civilians, contractors. You had Air Force, you had, of course, Army, plenty of Navy people. So it was a real, very joint environment, and a lot of people working. But in that one, it was the person in charge was an Army colonel. The next group over, I was in central Afghanistan. My buddy who was working in eastern Afghanistan in the same kind of joint environment, his boss was always a Navy person. Exact same structure, similar systems, everything. Just for that, whatever reason, that one was a Navy one, and where we were at was always Army. But that could change. It just happened to be while I was there the way it was. And it could change from one commander to the next. Like the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, also changes. Sometimes Army, sometimes Navy, occasionally Marine, or whatever. So it's just from the time you're there, it can't change. Though there are a few that are designated. This one is almost always Army, this one's almost always Navy, something like that. Anytime it has something to do with the water, there's usually a Navy person in charge. Not always with land. Usually with land, the predilection is to put an Army person in charge, but if it's something that's going to involve special operations, there could be a SEAL person in charge, or a Navy person. So it just depends on the nature. Or it could be a civilian. Sometimes, like the raid on Bin Laden, even though it was the Navy SEALs and a few other folks doing it in the military, technically the CIA was in charge of that. So it depends on the nature of the mission, the nature of the situation. Good. Anybody else? Okay, so that's just some things I wanted to highlight here. U.S. uniform, deployment uniform. The flag is an IR flag, there are no colors in it. Right? The boonie hat here is usually worn only when you're deployed, or you think nobody's around who's going to yell at you. But it's way more fun. All right, here's the rank structure. This is the Army rank structure. The key here, the key takeaway is they're very small groups, all the way up to very large groups. Here's the insignia of the people in charge of those organizations. When you go into the military, you're always in a group, and the group gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You know your chain of command. You know who's your boss's boss, and all the way up to the President of the United States, or the Guard, all the way up to the governor of a particular state. So this is generally pretty clear. New soldiers, young soldiers, normally have to recite the names of the commanders 3 levels above, 4 levels above, just whatever the person feels like messing with their mind and making them recite. But the idea is that you learn this chain of command and you report things up and down that chain of command. You skip a level of the chain of command. Like maybe you're here, you don't like this guy, so you go up to the lady over here, do that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's like any other large organization. The military, the federal government, the intel agencies are broken down into smaller organizations where you have your relatively clear chain. The intel agencies are a little more civilian, a little more loose in this. The military, especially the Army and the Marines, are much more hierarchical when it comes to this. And you gradually work your way up. Right? You get a lieutenant, somebody who just gets a brand new commissioned officer will come in as a lieutenant. Technically, this would be brown. Then there'll be a first lieutenant, and it'll be silver, captain. Work your way on up. So when you walk into a meeting with a group of people, it's good to know what some of these means. I was once in a fight, a very heated argument in Iraq. I was a civilian wearing the Army uniform, but I was a civilian. Heated, screaming at each other argument with somebody. And then I thought, I should learn what rank this guy is. And I looked down, and I saw the rank, but I didn't know what it was. Didn't know what it meant. I had no clue who I was screaming at. It's not a good thing. It's not a career enhancer to be doing something like that. So when the argument was finished, and he went his way and I went my way, I went and asked somebody, what does the bird mean? And they're like, oh, that's a colonel. If this is God, this is right up there next to him. This is like Pope-like. And so, so I was arguing with somebody who was seriously above me in the chain of command. It would behoove you to know these things prior to the argument. Fortunately, that was in Iraq, and I was leaving Iraq that night, so whatever. I hope he enjoyed trying to track me down. All right, so Navy, Marines, Air Force, they have their own similar breakdowns, clearly defined chain of command. Everybody should know the duties of the enlisted, the warrants, and the officers. Again, the warrants are usually special. They'll be in here, but they're usually kind of off to the side with a very specific task, a very specific job. But again, if somebody says you're going to have a meeting with a platoon leader, versus if somebody says you're going to have a meeting with a division commander, and know what that means. Platoon leader could be a dude who was at West Point 3 weeks ago, right? Brand new. They're saying you're going to meet somebody with a brigade or division leader. That's a serious person with thousands of people that they're overseeing, tens of millions of dollars in budget, the ability at the division level to take over a small country. Right? So know who you're meeting. Right? Know what these mean when you see it. You see it in the media all the time. They'll say, the NCO in charge of the battalion, blah, blah, blah. They'll make mistakes like that that just sound and just grate on your brain, because there's no way an NCO, which is here, is going to be in charge of something here. And so it does nothing but lower your credibility when you make mistakes in this type of situation. So it's pretty easy. Hop online, Google it, ask somebody. I'm happy to walk you through this stuff. But it's easy to check. So if you don't, it hurts your credibility for not doing it. I was guilty of this because I was working for the government prior to joining the military, didn't know very much about the military, and made some similar mistakes. I'm not speaking as something I've suffered because of it. And so please avoid that suffering and learn this if you're going to be working with these people. It helps. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is when you join the military, you start off as a sergeant and then you go up.
Well, it
you get
depends.
promoted.
If you join as an enlisted soldier or enlisted person, you start off as an E1 in the Army or Marines, that'd be private, or in the Army, you'd be a private. Right. If you join, if you're a college graduate, for example, you can join as an officer and start as a lieutenant. Right. So it depends on where you enter.
Okay.
And it's possible to switch. Plenty of people start off as enlisted, officers get paid more, right? And so they'll switch over to the dark side, is what everybody says. They'll switch over and join the officer side. Or they'll be enlisted for a while, get really into a job, really like that job, and they'll switch over to the warrant officer side of the house. And you can switch. And people, especially outside, have kind of a hierarchical nature. Like enlisted are lower, officers are higher. Yeah, enlisted sometimes have to salute. Not in a war zone. But enlisted do a job. If you're interested in actually doing something, enlisted is the way to go. Then eventually, if you're really into it, you could become a warrant. Officers are just managing. Once you hit a certain level as an officer, once you get up here, frankly, you're just making PowerPoint or watching people give you PowerPoint and making some decisions. You may as well be a civilian at that point. So there are very good things to be said about being enlisted. There are officers who have switched to be enlisted as officers who have switched to being warrants. Had I been able to do it over again, I wouldn't have joined to become an officer. It's more interesting to be enlisted or frankly warrant officer is the best position. That's my own personal opinion. Plenty of people would violently disagree with me, but just keep that in mind, that some people look at enlisted and kind of talk down or look down on them. That's the case. They may just really love their job and that's what they're doing. And they'll know that job more so than the officer who's technically in charge. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
This only applies if you're a line officer, right? Like if you're supply, you're not, are you still also?
Still, yeah. You would be, this platoon could be infantry platoon, or it could be a platoon of soldiers working in a warehouse. In case you're the supply lieutenant in charge of a group of soldiers who are working in that warehouse. Or it could be a signals platoon, getting communications and everything connected for people. You're the platoon in charge, or you're the lieutenant in charge of that platoon, and so you're getting people to do the signals. Cyber, military intelligence, MP, all of those have basically the same structure. The job may switch, but the structure will generally remain the same. You get out to some areas, and we'll get into special operations in a minute that blows all the rules up. But generally speaking, for the Army, generally also for the Marines, this is roughly what you're going to get. Air Force and Navy will have different names, maybe different sizes because the size of a ship determines some of this stuff, but roughly similar. And how do you choose your job? It's a good question. Some people are supply, some people are MPs, some people are intel, some people are information operations. How do you choose that? You go talk to your recruiter. You'll talk to your recruiter before you ever join. You say, hey, I saw this cool website that talked about this. Or if you're 17 or 18, you played some cool video game and saw something and you want to go try, hey, maybe I can jump out of a plane. Jumping's easy. It's hitting, it's a freaking problem. So you go and you talk to your recruiter, and that's how you choose that job. But that recruiter may have some quotas. He or she may be full up on superstar rangers, but really need some cooks, or really need some people to be doing water desalinization. And so he may try to push you into that. And so that's how you can kind of choose it as an enlisted soldier. Officers are different. Officers, several routes, but the most common route for ROTC, West Point, those folks, is an Order of Merit list, OML, Order of Merit. Everybody throughout the entire country is ranked based on your physical capabilities, your push-ups, sit-ups, running, all that stuff, your grades, your performance evals. You're ranked on all these different facets throughout the entire country, and there's a number 1 all the way down to the very bottom. And the first person on that list, they come to and say, all right, here's the entire Army. What do you want to do? And you get to choose. And they gradually work their way down. And so if you really want a particular job, but you're low on that list, congratulations. You may get stuck doing some god-awful thing that you don't want to do. And so a lot of times that's how officers choose or don't get to choose, depending on your status on the OML, what job you do.
Question. The water desalination, is that a separate unit, or does that fit within logistics? Or
It fits within logistics, yeah. It fits within quartermasters, which fit for the Army side. It fits within quartermaster, which is within logistics. The training is down at Fort Lee, Virginia. And they have some very, very large pieces of equipment, all the way down to some very small pieces of equipment, depending on whether they're supporting a squad, a platoon, a company, et cetera, while they're overseas. Here in the U.S., in case of like a Hurricane Sandy, then you bring the biggest one as possible, put it near as possible to large power, because those things need tons of power. So we have all these rules, we talked about all this stuff. Then you get to the special people, and all the rules go out the window. All right? What do you have to wear? Wherever you want. What do you ride? You ride a damn horse if you want. Sleeves, fully, completely optional. Shaving, whatever. Grow a beard. So, special people, special operations, kind of throw the rules out the window. There's no saluting. A lot of times they'll call the people above them by their first name, which is a big no-no in the traditional or the conventional Army. All services have them. People, the media especially, will use special forces interchangeably with special operations. It's different. Special forces are U.S. Army Green Berets. That's it. U.S. Army Green Berets. They are part of special operations, as are SEALs, certain elements of the Marines, et cetera, et cetera. All right? So special forces are part of special operations. Special operations are not part of special forces. It's different. Each branch has their own special organizations. The Marines used to argue that we're all special forces because we're Marines. But even now they have the Marine Special Operations Command, so the most special of the special for that. Pre-9/11, this was viewed as a dead end. A bunch of weirdos, snake eaters who sit out in the jungle doing odd stuff. If you want your career to die and never get promoted again, go be in special forces or special operations. Post 9/11, completely flipped. It's all the money, all the cool toys, all the special weapons, all the fanciest helicopters. These guys get it first. And that's the point. These guys get it first. Special operations at this point is pretty much exclusively male only. But every branch of service has been mandated by next January to come up with a policy, a plan of how they're going to integrate women into special operations, into special forces, into the Rangers, into the SEALs, into all this stuff. The organizations are experimenting with this now. This past summer, we had 2 women in the Army graduate Ranger School. They've met all the qualifications to be in special operations. How are you going to manage that? How are you going to do that? So right now, everybody's putting that plan together. In January, barring another delay, they have to declare, all right, this is how we're going to do it. The most intransigent group so far has been the Marines. This isn't going to work. We're keeping women out of special operations. We're keeping women out of the infantry. Army's been a little more open. Different people, different things. But everybody's been experimenting. Everybody's been trying to have women go through some of these courses to see what happens, to kind of put together the policy. Key point though, you have special operations, special operators, but you have people who work with them. People who work with them are not them. They haven't been to the same schools, they haven't had the same level of training, but they are allowed to work with them. Plenty of women have worked with them, gone out on missions with them, performed perfectly admirably, won high-level medals for sacrifices made on the battlefield while working with these people. There's no question, in my mind, that women can work successfully in these organizations. It's just a matter of working through the policy implications. And what's the main bone of contention?
Weight, being able to lift it up.
Physical requirements. Nobody, a lot of people don't want to lower those standards. They want the standards to remain exactly the same. And so the argument is, okay, if the women can meet these standards, have at it. So it's in that kind of simple explanation. If certain females can meet those requirements, then they'll be allowed to join. But then you take it to the next level. Female, two of you who have passed Ranger School, you're now going to go join Ranger Regiment with 2,000 men. Where are you going to live? Where are you going to go to the bathroom? What are you going to do out in the field? All right, there's all these follow-on issues that have to be worked out to figure out how to deal with that once they're integrated. A huge issue in the Army, outside of integrating women into special operations, is SHARP, sexual harassment and awareness and prevention. Right? So what are your levels going to do when you suddenly have a bunch of women entering into a previously all-male organization? How are you going to manage that in a way that doesn't result in anything bad happening? And so there's all these different levels and plans of how to do that. All those plans are due in January for how the services are going to try and do it.
I don't know how serious this was, but I read an article yesterday, in general, somebody gave a speech saying if women are going to be in it, then they should join the draft also.
Yeah. All these people have these different takes on it, and so some of them joking, some of them half serious, some of them very, very serious. And so, yeah. So it's, but yeah, and you have that. I mean, and it's you have all these different arguments for that, and so we'll see how it works out. And then you get the cultural issue, which is one of the reasons these gentlemen have beards, is because they're working in a culture where men have beards. Right? And if you don't have a beard as a male, and you're interacting with a bunch of people who do, the interface isn't going to quite work right. You're not showing the cultural respect that you need to show to fully be able to work with the locals. Right? And that's one of the reasons why beards are allowed or encouraged. For some of them, it's an actual requirement. Before you deploy, you have to grow a beard. So that shows it's a way of showing respect and getting along better with the locals. But if the locals will not work with women, well, then what do you do? Right, so you have to figure that out. One of the ways it was worked in Afghanistan is men would work with men if there was a strike on a target. The helicopters come down, people go into a compound, strike that compound. Right? Men would take care of the men, but it's a family compound. There's going to be women and children on that compound. So they started having women join the special operators out on the mission, and then the U.S. women, with their female interpreters, would talk to the local women and children on target. So that was one way of kind of working around that, and also a way, frankly, of testing how women do in these special operations missions. So there's all kinds of things, impromptu ways to address it, and then the big picture addressing of it, which is due to take place in January, but the government's not always the most timely organization. Okay. So those are the main issues here to keep in mind. That's the last of the Army stuff. Any other military questions? We'll jump into Intel. Intel's quicker, and then we'll move on. I just got the classification levels: unclassified, confidential, secret, top secret, TS. The higher levels include the lower levels. Anyone with TS credentials has access to secret, confidential, etc. Confidential is usually for PII, personally identifiable information, social security number, your medical history, your performance reviews, things that aren't really classified at a national level, but you don't obviously want spread all over the internet or all over some printout. So that's usually for confidential. You hear this all the time, media and the movies. Oh, it's higher than top secret. It's classified higher than top secret. It just sounds silly. There's nothing higher than top secret. It's levels. It works its way up. Unclass, confidential, which you almost never see outside of the person identifiable information, the HR type stuff. secret, and then top secret. Within each of these levels, there are separate programs. Just because you have a secret clearance doesn't mean you have access to everything secret. You have access to the things that you have a need to know. You'll see that in the movies, TV, whatever. You'll see he or she has a need to know. So you get read into the program, and then now you have access to that. So just because you have a secret doesn't mean you get to know all the secret stuff. You get to know some of it. And if you have a need to know, then you can know specific programs. It's the same at the TS level. Just because we have a TS, you're not like, sweet, now I can find out everything. Now, certain programs you have a need to know, and you'll be called into a little room. You'll sit in a little room, you have a little briefing, maybe watch a little video, a little presentation, you sign a little form, and now you have need to know and you have access to that program. And you go in and it's actually nothing special, but they make a big process out of it. Right? And so that's where you have this higher than top secret is not, they're just referring to something that's called the sensitive compartmented information. Some of this is very sensitive. Some of it may only have 12 people in the whole country who know about it. Only 12 people who are read on to this particular program or this particular mission, whatever it may be, this particular technical capability, whatever. So some of it is pretty limited, and if you have the need to know, you get read into it. And also, you get read off. You go on a particular mission, you have a particular assignment, a particular job that has that need to know, then you switch jobs. Nothing about you, like everybody else. You switch assignments, you come back from Afghanistan, whatever it may be, so you get read off. This is like only a bureaucrat or a lawyer could come up with this. One day you know all this stuff, you have all this information, you come in, you sign a form, and you walk out the door and it's all gone. You forget all the stuff that you learned. So yeah, only 12 people in the whole country are read onto this program. You know, never mind the 400 who've been read onto it previously who still have some knowledge of it. Anyway, that's the way it works. Bureaucracies have their own ways of doing things. I kind of used to imagine, all right, on the plane ride somewhere over the Atlantic, everything will leave my brain, and I'll forget.
Question.
Sure.
So I know for the Boren Fellowship and the Boren Scholarship, you get a security clearance. What level is that?
Usually secret. And we'll get into the clearances and the process and all that stuff over the next couple of slides, but usually secret. Every military officer has or should have a secret. Secret's very common, and we're going to get into that on the next slide. Top secret is harder to get, not as common, but secret is really common. And that's what you'll have to get for most of that kind of stuff. Okay. And so, yeah, so you hear all this top secret, oh, it's so classified. Really, millions of people have access to this information. All right, so this is from 09 and 2010, and I picked that for a reason, and we'll get into that in a second. All right, so federal employees. Federal employees includes people in the military. So it's not just civilians in DC, this is also Marines, etc. Right? People in the military with confidential or secret. Over 2.1 million people. Add in the top secret, and you're getting your 3 million people with access to this information. Contractors. People don't even really work for them, other than as a contract base. 1 million people. Others. They don't even know who these people are. Others. 300,000 people have access to all this stuff. Right? So a lot of people have access to it, especially at the secret level. So, and it's not just somebody who's intel, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but a very broad array of people, as you mentioned with some of the scholarships, some of the fellows, you need to have some of these clearances. Right? And so that's where a lot of this comes in. And because of all of this, because so many people have access to it, recently there was a insider threat and security clearance reform, aka the Snowden law. So many people have access to it, they don't really know what the heck's going on. And it's easy for somebody to grab all that information, a Manning, a Snowden, and broadcast it and send it out. And so they're trying to reduce the number of people who have access to it, to reduce the likelihood of something like that happening. Whatever your opinion of Snowden or Manning, the response to them has been to drastically reduce the number of people who have access to this information. In the first quarter of 2015, down 12% to 2.2 million, which is still a large number, but it's trending down. Prior to that, it was just trending up. All right? The DoD alone, in just the first half of 2015, dropped 100,000 people. All right? This is two things. Mainly, it's a result of too many people, impetus, huge impetus given to it by the Snowden situation, And then more recently, the OPM hack, the Office of Personnel Management, which handily condensed all of the information you provide during your background check into one nice database, dangled that database out there with almost no protection, so the Chinese were able to come in and get all the information from that database. So every single person who has a clearance, every detail of their private personal life is now possessed by the Chinese and whoever else has been able to steal and access that data. So another reason why this is changing who has access to it, who has all this information. All right. And that also brings up the first clearance difficulty. They're reducing the amount of these that are given out, which means if you have one, the supply is going down. The supply of cleared professionals is going down. The demand for them, especially in the cyber realm, is going up. So if you have one, you're more valuable. Your salary, technically, you can command a higher salary. If you're on the outside and you want to get in and get one of these, it's that much more difficult, it's that much more expensive. Right? It's that much more of a pain, higher of a hurdle. So that's something to keep in mind during the job hunt process. Questions with this? We're almost done. Okay, so getting a job, getting a clearance. Military, the clearance, join the military. For an officer, everybody gets at least a secret. Depending on your job, you'll get a top secret. Government. For government, everybody thinks of three-letter agencies. NSA, CIA, etc. Oh, I got to go work there, and then I can get my clearance. Not always. You can join the State Department. Foreign service officers all have a TS. They need it for some of the interactions that they do. USAID. Oh, I'm just going to work in international development. I don't need to deal with this. No, if you're a USAID, working overseas, you're a foreign service officer, you're going to have to go through the TS process. Right? So plenty of people working in development and diplomacy also have to be familiar with clearances and the whole process of getting Department of Energy. They have intel folks specializing in nukes, nuclear exchange, nuclear smuggling. When Kerry was having trouble getting the final agreement with the Iranians, he called in the head of the Department of Energy to give him some kind of technical advice. Right? So DOE, Department of Energy, has plenty of people with clearances specializing in intel. Department of Agriculture, right? The bioweapons experts, the people who track disease outbreaks around the world to make sure that disease doesn't come to the US and sicken people, or also, and sometimes people argue just as importantly, ruin the agricultural industry or the livestock industry. So they track all this stuff, and a lot of this is done at the intel level. So there are many different paths to this. You may think, I'm never going to have anything to do with it. But a lot of times it pops up in the oddest places. You can be in Afghanistan doing whatever. You decide, hey, I'm going to have a project there and put in a well. Or I'm going to try to get these people to stop growing opium poppies and start growing something else. Well, a lot of people who do that are DA people, Department of Agriculture people. So they're having the clearances, working with the military, working with the other intel agencies, and doing all this stuff. And so it interacts, it pops up all over the place. It's the kind of the securitization of foreign policy. You can completely see this when it comes to security clearances. Okay, then you have the contracts. The first two, government, military, they'll pay. It can cost up to $100,000 to get somebody a top secret security clearance. A contractor is not going to pay that. The government and the military will. So if you were here, you can bring your clearance to here. But they're not going to give somebody off the street this clearance. So you're already kind of cut if you want to get one of these jobs. You're limited by the funnel is wide here, it's basically closed here. Okay. Most of their intel agencies, the CIAs, the DIAs, the NSAs, they have their own hiring process to avoid exactly what happened at OPM, where one hack gets all of the information sucked out. So they have their own hiring process. You can't really use USA Jobs. The theory behind USA Jobs is you put all of your information up there and you can just apply to different jobs. It's not the case within most of your intel jobs in the intel agencies. You have to go into each of the systems or each of the organizations and apply within them. State Department will have on USA Jobs, Agriculture, Energy. Theirs will be there. CIA, NSA, they have their own systems. They want to prevent that particular hack. Okay, and then talk about background checks. For a secret clearance, it's a glorified credit check. It's easy. Some paperwork, they do some checking on your credit. It can take 6 weeks. Bam, you can get your clearance. All right? For a TS, TS is insane. All right? You have to fill out this form, the SF-86, which, depending on your background, if you moved around a lot in your life, you've had a lot of jobs, if you're just frankly older, it can be dozens of pages. It can hit over 100 pages. Detailed information. Where have you lived the past 10 years? Every single address. Who do you know who can vouch for you having lived at each of those addresses? Where have you worked the last 10 years? Every single place, and also provide the name of at least one person who can vouch for you having worked there. This is a lot of information. Foreign countries you visited, relatives, friends, coworkers who are not US citizens, anyone you have an ongoing relationship with, all of this stuff is part of the SF-86, part of the background check. People will call. You'll have a background investigator who will meet with you, ask you a ton of questions, and then go and ask your family members, coworkers, etc. questions. They will not always identify themselves as someone doing a background check. Your old boss will get a call saying, hey, I'm asking you some questions about Scott Fischer. I want to know if he's a terrorist. I want to know blah, blah, blah. You'll later then get an email from your ex-boss frantically saying, are you in trouble? Is everything okay? And then you'll explain to her that no, it's the bozo just didn't identify what he was doing it for. It's actually for my background check. So keep in mind, this is a process, and it may create some disruption in your background. Plus, what was your address 8 years ago? You know it? Yeah. Where's an easy place to find it? It's like this weird little thing.
The internet?
Yeah, the internet. Most people go on Amazon. If you've been ordering stuff off Amazon, they have a copy of your address. So everybody goes to Amazon. Bing, 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 bing. Now the joke is, if you can't remember, call up the liaison officer from China, and he'll punch it up and give you all the data.
So if you've lived in so many places that it would be very challenging to trace that means you're off that list?
Doesn't mean you're off, it just means it takes longer. And the process is then more expensive. But if you're doing it through the government or the military, they'll pay for it. Just means the process is longer. I lived overseas most of my life. Prior to getting my Army clearance, I've been to Iran, I've been to North Korea, China, Vietnam, you name it. The person doing my background investigation was not happy with any of that. And it took me much longer, but I still got it. It's not so much you can't get it, it's just it takes longer to get it. The things that really rule you out, bankruptcy, multiple bankruptcies, and any type of criminal background, those are the two that are kind of a no-go. If you have a spouse, for example, who's not a US citizen, he or she will need to get US citizenship as part of that process. It doesn't rule you out. They'll just need to get citizenship as part of that process and have a clear path to getting that. So there's a few things in there, but most people you can at least begin the process and it'll just stretch longer. At the end they may adjudicate and say no, but usually, provided you meet certain criminal background and other things, you can get through.
Follow-up question. So if your colleagues work for other governments, you're calling other governments to...
This I had the same issue because I lived overseas for so long. They want to interview only Americans. And so you need to dig up some American who knows you or knows you while you were working at those organizations who can, not so much vouch for you, but just who they can ask a set of questions to. And so that can, depending on your work situation or living situation, that can get very tricky. And so, but again, it's part of a process. There's usually not one thing that rules somebody out, it's usually a confluence of things that will rule people out. And then, not everybody gets this. Some people get a polygraph at the end. Single scope, just purely counter intel, or full scope. Full scope is the stuff you see in the movies, where you're sitting down, sweating, you have things stuck to your head. They're asking you all these crazy questions about your background, your most intimate details of everything you ever wanted to hide, that they're trying to get in there and find that out. That's a full scope. A single scope, a counter intel polys can be 15 minutes. Have you ever sold classified information to a foreign government? Have you ever stolen classified? It's like a few questions, relatively simple. The full scope is a nightmare. I've never done a full scope. I've done this one. Not so bad. That one I don't really want to do. All right, that one can be kind of crazy. And depending on your answers, you're out the door. So that can be a stressful situation for people. I think we're about, yeah. All right, and that kind of wraps it up. Thanks for your time. Any remaining questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, sir.
I have two questions. One, why Intel 101? That's kind of a great question, though.
Oh, Intel 101 is just the kind of the intro beginning.
Okay.
Okay.